Hello everyone, Jim Hitt here with another edition of the Hitt List, the first time in video. Today I thought I would give you a background of my writing career. I started writing in the 1980s for magazines, mostly True West and Real West. The first article that I sold was called Madame May, and it was about a prostitute out of Bodie. That followed with several others. Somewhere around 1985, I got an assignment from True West to write an article on the films of Ronald Reagan. Well, I wrote the article, and it was totally non-political. It had nothing but facts about his movies, the Western films he made, the fact that he liked making Westerns and so forth. No politics involved at all. After the article appeared, and it was the front page of the magazine, it was the lead article. After the magazine appeared, the editor called me and said, "Jim, I got some good news for you and some bad news. The good news is your article had more enthusiasm and response than any article we ever ran. The bad news, we also had more cancellation of subscriptions." My first book, The American West from Fiction into Film, was published in 1990 by McFarlane. It has since been called the definitive monograph on the subject. Essentially, it's a comparison of Western literature, American Western literature, to the films that were made from it. I followed that up in 1992, I believe, with Words and Shadows, published by Citadel. This was an examination of mainstream American literature that was made into films. In 2001, I had a novel published called The Last Warrior that no one ever read. And I had a book, and my next success came in 2010 when I wrote a short story called The Boy with Too Much Hair, which won a fantasy award. And that became part of a novel called CARNY, a novel in stories, which went on to win 2 prizes for the Next Generation Indie Book Award. It won the Best Novel Under 80,000 Words, and it also won the Grand Prize for Fiction. To me, that's a fairly impressive award, and it surprised me. It's kind of the Pulitzer Prize for small presses. And my last book has just been published, and it's called The Courage of Others, which is kind of a cross between My Antonia by Willa Cather and To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. I don't put my book in the class with those 2 masterpieces, but they certainly are the biggest influence.
And Esther knocked on the door, the solid wood hard against her small knuckles. When no one answered, she knocked again. This time the door flew open, and we faced a young man, 17 or 18, broad-shouldered, his skin dark like the night. He looked down upon us with a detached anger, as if our presence offended him, and his chiseled face reminded me of an ebony mask I had once seen in a history textbook. "Who's come calling, Daniel?" the voice said from inside. Although I could not see his sister Rose, I recognized her voice, soft and melodic, and, in its own way, cultured. Every other colored woman and man I knew talked in that particular Southern colloquial dialect, so prevalent among their race, but not Sister Rose. She sounded more white than most white people, although I would never have said it to her face. And it didn't sound as if she was putting on airs. Her words and voice were unforced and natural. When the young man failed to respond right away, Sister Rose said, "Well, your manners. Invite our guests inside." The young man stepped aside, and we entered. The smell of boiled collard greens permeated the one-room house. In a far corner, a wash basin full of soapy water and plates rested on the kitchen table, and the young man's sleeves were rolled up past his elbows. Beads of water and soap suds clung to his forearms. Sister Rose sat with her back to a window, and in her lap she clutched an open book, so old and weathered that the pages had yellowed and curled. A brown water stain discolored the top, and the cardboard jacket hung loose from the binding. When she saw us, she laid the book on the floor next to her rocker, allowing me to see the title, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. To her right were two shelves, nothing more than wood planks supported by old bricks, which held an additional 15 or 20 books, more than I had seen in any one place except the schoolhouse. As far as I knew, nobody in town except my teacher, Miss Pilgrim, owned so many books, and I couldn't remember seeing another adult reading anything other than the Bible. My uncle was unusual in the fact that every day he read the newspaper from cover to cover. Yet here was a colored woman reading a novel, and who possessed her own private library. A few townspeople owned copies of Ben-Hur, but I never heard one person say he or she had actually read it. Sister Rose stood, a tall woman who held herself erect, proud. "Why, if it isn't Miss Esther." She didn't offer her hand or approach Aunt Esther. That would have been too forward. She was the aristocrat of Boonesville, if such a thing were possible. But in the white world, she was only one more colored woman, nothing more. Aunt Esther crossed the room and extended her hand. "I expect you know my boy, Davy," Aunt Esther said. Sister Rose took my aunt's hand as she appraised me with her dark eyes. "I hear tell your boy's a scholar." I didn't know how to respond, feeling that if I agreed, I would be bragging. If I denied it, I would be lying. As a result, I kept my mouth shut. Sister Rose said, "My boy studies some himself, don't you, Daniel?" "Some," Daniel said, his voice the deepest bass I ever heard, a voice made for singing, or poetry. Many times I had seen him around Twin Forks, a book sticking from his overalls, although I figured it was a way of shoving it in our faces and saying, "I got a book and can read better than you." He had a book in his pocket now, the spine showing the first word of the title, Pudd'nhead. "What can I do for you, Miss Esther?" Sister Rose asked. "As I'm sure you heard, my man has come home. He's doing poorly, real poorly. I need someone to look after him while I run the store. I hear you're good at helping those that are suffering." Sister Rose stiffened. "I know what people in town say. They say I'm a witch, that I have magic cures. I'm no witch, Miss Esther. I know a few herbs, a few roots that can help those in pain, but I'm no witch." "Never meant no such thing," Aunt Esther said. "I need you to sit with him, look after his needs. Davy does what he can. He would like to do more, but I won't have his study suffering, so I need help. I can pay 50 cents a week. I know it ain't much." "That's a really generous offer," Sister Rose said. "And you'll do it?" "I'll bring my boy around, too. You wouldn't mind, would you, Daniel?" "Whatever you need, Mama," the young man said. "Would you like us to come with you today?" asked Sister Rose. "We could walk back with you right now." We were unprepared for such kindness, and Aunt Esther was taken aback. Tears gathered in the corners of her eyes. She pushed her lips together and willed herself not to shed them. She took a moment to find her voice. "Maybe you could bring along some of those potions if you think they might help wash," she said. Sister Rose kneeled before a cabinet, opening the bottom drawer, where a number of bottles of all sizes and shapes sat in perfectly aligned rows. She took 3 of them, studying each first before she placed them in a brown cloth bag. She stood and passed the bag to her son, who tied the top into a knot and wound it around his waist. "We can go now, Miss Esther, if you're ready," she said. We walked the 2 miles back to town, Aunt Esther and Sister Rose leading, Daniel and I following 10 or 12 paces back, so we didn't catch their dust. The boy kept a hostile silence, and I wondered if he were mad because his mother had asked him to accompany us. He was a head taller than I, and I had to look up to see his sculptured expression. the kind that would cause the people of Twin Forks to call him uppity. Whatever his attitude, it made me uncomfortable. In an effort to break the tension, I pointed to the book in his back pocket. "I've read Pudd'nhead Wilson." So, my teacher, Miss Pilgrim, had loaned me the book, and I recall the fierce rush with which I devoured the novel in 2 consecutive nights. Because I loved it so, I wanted to talk about it with someone other than Miss Pilgrim, and all I got for my troubles was "so." Right then I figured he had never read the novel, that as I suspected, he wore the book for show. "Good book," I said, "that's all." I was tempted to say more, to tell him to go to hell, but instead I fumed all the way into town. Uppity was a good word for him, I thought.